Hello there and welcome to another week of brand new Doctor Who. I don't know about you, but I've felt that a lot of this season has been just gearing up to these last two episodes. A lot of the talk that we've had around the series has been on these big questions of who is Susan Twist, Mrs. Flood, and indeed Ruby Sunday. Well, tonight we find out, at least we start to find out, as it's the first of a two-part finale where we'll say goodbye to the Doctor and Ruby after only 8 episodes. And that seems like it's just far too little, especially since two of the episodes were a bit Doctor-light. However, it's now time to find out what Russel T Davies has had in store for us all this time as we explore the legend of Ruby Sunday. Please be aware that this video will contain spoilers as we go beyond the sofa. I have to apologise before we start because this is going to be, well, I say it's going to be a little bit shorter than most videos that I've been putting together over the last few weeks, but I don't really know. I mean, I've liked to do a little bit of a rundown of viewing figures and the reaction to previous episodes and things. The problem is I am absolutely swamped. And I've not really had a lot of time to spend on Twitter seeing what people are talking about in this series. If anyone is interested, I'm actually working on a brand new product that helps people write sales pages with the help of ChatGPT. And I'm doing that because I know that a lot of people struggle with writing, and yet it's something that is absolutely vital for businesses. Anyway, enough about that. Very briefly, in the last week, Rogue picked up about 2.11 million viewers, which isn't particularly good at all. I know a lot of people are saying that that this isn't a problem. And we've also had Russel T Davies come out and say that they're not necessarily the figures that they would have liked. And at the same time that we found out that the consolidated for Dot and Babble was 3.38 million, down on the previous week. But it's important to understand that it also got a 27% audience share. And it was, I believe, the third most watched program of the day, or the first most watched drama program of the day, or something like that. So the figures aren't spectacular. They're not particularly good, but they've got to be understood through this lens of how many people are watching television at the time anyway, and how many of those people are tuning into Doctor Who. And once again, the word of caution that I've been using since I started making these videos, we do not know what the BBC is tracking, so we've got no idea whether these are good or bad, or whether they'll lead to cancellation or renewal. And I know we haven't heard anything from Disney about season 3 yet, but unless a show is a massive hit, you're very rarely going to hear about the next season during the run of the show. So without further ado, which makes you think what was ado in the first place, let's dive into the legend of Ruby Sunday. I don't know about you, but I feel like we haven't had enough Doctor Who this season. I suppose that's why it feels like this episode is hitting a lot of those old tropes, and it's doing it rather well. I really enjoyed this. It sort of swept me along, and some of the other episodes just haven't managed to do that this season. That's not to say that they're not good episodes. It's just that, well, there was something that was about this that it just felt a little bit more timey-wimey. So the thing that everybody's going to be talking about, of course, is going to be the reveal. And this did what every good murder mystery and thriller does, and it gave us a twist at the end. And what a twist. What's really great about the way that this episode played out is that everybody was right. Those people thinking it was Susan, well, that was a possibility that actually came up in the show. Those people thinking that it was Sootex were also right on the money. We still haven't had an explanation of Mrs. Flood, and I do wonder, now that there's so many of the revelations that have been revealed, which tends to happen with revelations after all, I do wonder whether it'll turn out that Mrs. Flood is Ruby's mother, but what that might mean about her knowledge of TARDISes, and I don't know. Anyway, as the story opens, we get this plot about the rich person giving away software. Now, is it me, or have we seen this somewhere before? Because I'm pretty sure that there was a plot where people had the free delivery of software being the system that was there for human downfall. Wasn't it the Nightmare Fair? Hasn't something like that? Wasn't there? Were kids given computer games and those games trapped their minds? And ironically, that would have been the second appearance of the Toy Maker had it actually made it to television. Anyway, right from the start, we get all of the theories. The whole Doctor's granddaughter is, that's suggested very quickly. And it's at that point I thought that Susan Triad probably wasn't Susan Foreman. In fact, it wouldn't make a lot of sense, kind of, if you think about it, where the Doctor left Susan in the future. One of the things that this story does quite nicely is the time travel. It remembers that the Doctor can't cross his own timeline, or at least not unless it's in a very extraordinary situation. And that becomes a plot point, a reason why the Doctor can't go back in time and see the face of Ruby's mother. I really liked the way that that was thought through. I also really liked seeing Mel as a spy. Somehow these later appearances, they're just really rounding her character off in a way that they should have done it in the show. And we just never got that, but now we're getting it, which is fantastic. We even get a little bit of her being a computer technician later in the episode as well. And, you know, I'm there for that kind of thing. You know, there's so much about this episode that is just flowing through my head right now, and I don't really know where to start. So let's talk about the Doctor, who doesn't have kids yet. Now, that's a really interesting time travel way to tackle something that's been around for 60 years. I know a lot of people, especially in the Wilderness years, were suggesting that Susan wasn't from Gallifrey at all. But all of the extended media, as far as I can tell, suggests that she is. This line, brief as it was, does seem to cement that idea into the show, and that worked for me. And of course, most of this episode takes place inside a VHS. One of the standout things about this episode is that attention to detail and the special effects. And one of the things that I've done when editing my videos in the past is I've had that kind of 80s film look. You know, you desaturate the colours, you put the lines on the screen, and you have little glitches. And what they've done here is put all of that into a three-dimensional environment, and then we've placed our characters into it, and it's really well realised. And even so, it doesn't actually detract from the emotional story that we're trying to tell. We still get all of Ruby's pain of not being able to see her mother, but we also get the mystery of that entity at this point as well. And obviously, this is the first introduction of our ancient Egyptian god, although we don't know it at this point. The moment I thought that all of the fan theories would turn out to be correct was when we saw the dead body of that unit officer, and it was just sand. What better way for an Egyptian god of death to kill somebody than turning them to sand? That whole scene was really the only problem bit of the episode. And the problem doesn't really exist within the episode. Rather, it's within UNIT itself. One of the problems of having an organization like UNIT, by this point, it's so well funded and it's so well equipped. It's got virtually everything that you would need on hand. And this is the case here as well. There was one point where I was thinking, hold on, it's just a little bit too convenient, this, isn't it? And there was also a little bit of clunky techno babble around this scene as well. But there's always going to be a little bit of a problem when you've got such a lot to convey in such a small space of time. On the whole, none of that actually harmed the story or the impact of the episode for me. One thing that did take me out of the story, just for a moment though, was hearing the name Sullivan on screen. And I do wonder if that was a reference to Harry Sullivan. And I'd love it if somebody would let me know at some point, if somebody says it at some point. So let's talk for a moment about anagrams. This is one of the things that we have as a fandom been talking about all week, and clearly many people worked out that there were multiple ways that you could rearrange S-triad technology. And for me, this was one of the cleverest things about the show. It leads you down the path of thinking that S-triad is an anagram for TARDIS. And at that point, we think, oh, that's where we're going, only for that to be pulled away at the end when the Doctor realizes that it was the wrong anagram after all. Even if you were thinking that one or other of these things might be the case in the show, the way that this was revealed was actually quite smart. I hope it has the same impact for other people as well. One of the things that I'm hoping at the moment is that because a lot of the fans have got a lot of things right about this series, that it doesn't detract from the actual watching and enjoyment of the episodes. And then, of course, we've got the actual reveal of Sootex, something that could never have been imagined in the 70s. But for me, even though I quite like the design, and I think I'd like it if it was in a different show, well, it didn't quite work for me. I think what I was expecting was something which was kind of along the lines of the Sootex we saw in the 1970s. Having said that, after last week, I'm kind of prepared to let some of this stuff go and just sit back and enjoy an episode. But that does lead us on to something amazing that you could only do in a show like this, and that's having a returning actor. And in this instance, it was Gabriel Wolf who voiced Sootex, this time around and back in the 1970s when the character appeared in front of Tom Baker. It's pretty awesome to be able to get that level of continuity nearly 50 years after the original episode aired. Anyway, look, I'm going to leave it there for this week because there's a lot of this episode that I don't seem to have processed properly yet. I know there are problems with it. I know there are problems with the scripting and the fact that it's mostly just exposition. There are elements of this that do feel a little bit like a bad Big Finish story. And again, we've got an episode that goes by at such a fast pace that it's often difficult to take a step back and breathe and just, experience what's going on. Perhaps because of the lateness at night, most of these things just washed over me tonight. And I think that this was the episode that I've enjoyed the most, but probably for all the wrong reasons. And I don't think that this is going to hold up in the future. If you watch this in a few years' time, all of those things have already been revealed. Of course, a lot of that's going to be dependent on what happens next week. And that's really the problem. We've only seen part of the story here, and it is entirely possible that as things play out in the coming week, we're going to get an absolutely triumphant finale. It's also possible that things will go absolutely terribly and it will completely bomb. And we'll have to wait until next week to find out which. Until then, thanks ever so much for watching. I'm sorry if this has been a little bit rambling, but I've been a little bit rambling myself this week. Since I'm incredibly tired from work and everything that's going on in my life at the moment means that it's just an absolute madhouse here. But thank you for watching this far. It means an awful lot to me, and I know people are connected and say how much they like the videos. I'm so pleased about that. Do let me know what you think about the episode in the comments. Our next stop is going to be back at Unit HQ as they deal with the old and powerful siren god whose very name means death. That'll be fun. Anyway, why don't you come and join me back then when we go Beyond the Sofa.